Hello and welcome to the second lecture of the course, and this lecture is titled Enter MVC. And in this lecture we are going to introduce proper the model view controller programming paradigm, and we start by making a very simple observation, and that is that any web application may be thought as a small vocabulary of formal words which, when typed in the address bar of a browser, allow the user to complete certain tasks on data that in most cases are stored in a database. The MVC programming paradigm provides a method that facilitates us to develop and structure this vocabulary. We start with the C letter of the acronym, and C stands for controllers. And as we shall see, controllers mean actions. In the MVC paradigm, the functionality of each of these words of the special vocabulary we talked about is defined through functions that are called the actions of the application and are declared in the controllers of the application. Any application may have several controllers, and each controller may contain several actions. Controllers are object-oriented programming classes that are stored in the controllers folder of the application. The naming convention for naming any controller is an identifier of your choice, followed by the reserved word controller, for example, site controller. While to name actions, you use the reserved word action, followed by an identifier of your choice. For example, action login. We come now to views. V stands for views. The controller action communicates with the user through views. And the views for each controller are defined inside the subfolder of the folder views in the application folder. And each view subfolder bears the name of the corresponding controller. Views are the interface between the application and the user and are used to display data received from the controller as well as return data back to the controller. M now stands for models. Controller actions involve manipulation of objects, and the blueprints of these objects are stored as models that simply are user-defined object-oriented programming classes. As expected, models represent the structure of entities, that means data, on which the application works, plus they contain definitions of any methods, that means functions, used to manipulate that entities. Models may correspond to database tables for long-term storage. The user of the application does not have direct access to the methods of any model. This is achieved only via the action functions in the controllers. And here I have a nice picture that will give us a good visualization of MVC. In it, you see the controllers. We have two controllers, green and orange, with their corresponding views. The user, he's here, looks at the browser screen on which a view is projected. When the user interacts with the controls of the view, for example, he presses a submit button, what he actually does is to submit a URL address in the address bar of the browser. And this URL address, this word, is actually the identifier of some action in the corresponding controller. As a result, this action is invoked, it manipulates objects, and then a new view, possibly in a different controller, is presented to the user, and actually the circle repeats. Okay. The blueprints of this object, of the objects manipulated by our application, are object-oriented classes stored as models here. And the models describe not only the structure of objects, but encapsulate methods to operate on them. Some models have methods that allow objects of that class to be stored in or retrieved from database tables. Needless to say that such models will play a more significant role starting from the next lecture onwards. Before we proceed, you can download the indicated file from the link given in the description section below, and it contains all models, views and controllers that we shall be subsequently discussing. And you have to move these models, views and controllers to the folder xampp/htdocs.ic. So let's proceed and try to write our first controller that will just display several messages on screen. What you see in this slide is the overall layout of the controller. It's going to be pretty standard for everything we shall be writing next. First of all, you declare any library that you'll be using, and then comes the declaration of the controller itself. It says class message controller extends controller. It's standard object-oriented programming. The first function that should be included in any controller is the function behaviors, and we are going to have a closer look in that function in the next slide, and then follow any action you write yourself. And here we have written 4 actions: message run, message to, message X, and message send. So let's have a closer look at the function behaviors, and in the first action we have written. Function behaviors actually returns an array, and the element access of this array defines who can use the actions of the controller. And the way we have written it, we say that only registered users can use the actions of our controller, and this is very important, and that's why behaviors should be present in every controller we will be writing. Next, let's focus on how we have written our first action. It's very simple. Please notice the method rendered. It's a predefined method of the class controller, and as expected, it is used to call a view. And please notice its syntax. It says it is render, then you give the view identifier, and then you pass through an array all parameters that may be used by that view. And here is the view itself. It's a very minimal and pretty standard. And notice the naming convention used to connect the controller to the corresponding view. Finally, I have to adjust the main menu so as to be able to call the actions of our controller. And here you may notice that I may pass parameters to these actions from the main menu in case this is necessary. This slide shows in detail how views are rendered. So if in Yii2 you write the statement $this render xView, what Yii2 actually does is it renders not only xView, but the view layouts /main.php as well, in such a way that main.php is shown in the background, while xView is rendered in the foreground. In other words, the view layout /main.php is the common background of all the views you write in your application, and that is something you must bear in mind. let's proceed now to write the rest of the actions of our controller. We have action message 2, that's very similar to message 1. The only thing is that we have added a growl that appears in the screen. And because we have written the code for this growl in main.php, actually action message 2 and message 1 can share the same view. This is not the case with action message X that displays an error message using the alert widget. And you have to write the code for producing this widget in a view specific for that action. Finally, we have action message Z that accepts a parameter. Depending on the value of the parameter, the action transfers control to different actions of the controller. And it does so by using the predefined method redirect there. And actually, you can use the redirect to transfer control to a different controller altogether. Next, the view for action message X that produces this error message on screen using the alert widget. Now, our message controller in action. Again, we are in our site IC, admin, enter, and we go to the messages menu. I press message 1, the welcome message changes, message 2, same thing there, but with the growl widget. Message X, the alert widget with the breadcrumbs I have created. I may go back to home. Messages, message Z1, it redirects me to message 1. Message Z2, it redirects me to message 2. And just log out. Having gained some confidence, we can proceed to write our first model. And here we see a typical layout for writing models. You start by declaring your namespace and any libraries you are going to use. And then you declare the model itself. It says class company X extends model, standard object-oriented programming there. Then you must declare any figurative constants that will be used by the model. And this is a formalism that must adopt the usage of figurative constants. It will pay handsomely in the future. It will make maintenance of your application much easier. After the figurative constants, you define the fields of the model. And there you must have two functions, rules and attribute labels. We'll have a closer look at them in the next slide. And after this, we have defined 3 user functions ourselves. So let's look at functions, rules, and attribute labels. These functions should be present in every model, objects of which will be involved in input-output operations. The first function, rules, describes what is considered as legitimate input for any field of the model. And it is automatically called when the predefined function validate is used by an object of the class. The function attribute labels, it's a very handy way to declare in one place and once only all labels associated with each field of the model. And you can use them subsequently in input-output forms. And here are our 3 user-defined functions. It's the function getState, the function getStateList, and the function setFields.
What the final function does is it copies the values of the array data passed as parameter into the corresponding fields of an object of type company X. Let's proceed to write a controller for our model. We planned for company X controller to have two actions, action create and action edit. We don't have any long-term memory capabilities since no database is present at the moment. So we set up the interaction of these two actions to be as shown below. We have the main menu. Through the main menu, you call action create, and actions create and edit communicate via view company. Here is an overview of the layout of the controller, company X controller. We have seen the same thing before in message controller. We begin by declaring all models to be used by our controller, then any libraries. Here is the controller definition itself. It's company X controller extends controller. We have the familiar function behaviors, and then you see down there one of the actions create, action create. The structure of action create will be common to all controllers that we shall be writing next. So I think it will be nice to read it in plain English. What it says is create a new object of class company X, and then it says if data for that object have been posted and the data is valid, yes, then show us the object created plus a small success growth. Otherwise, request data to be entered. Take a look at the predefined method validate that validates the data provided. Once you use it, automatically the rules of the model, the rules function of the model is invoked, and that is eventually what validates your input. Let's trace back a bit to the function behaviors. You see there that we have added the element actions there, and have altered that, and we declared that action edit will accept posted data. And that is a formalism that you should adopt for every action of the controller that accepts a parameter. You should require that this parameter is passed using the post method. And here is the create view itself. Again, the pattern of the layout will be standard. You start by declaring models and libraries to be used, and then you set up all drop-down lists, if any, and any date picker options, if any, plus the breadcrumbs widget. And after that follows the active form. And notice in the active form how the model fields are coupled to input controls. And in the particular example you see there, all input controls we shall be using in the course are present. For example, you may see text boxes, drop-down lists, and date pickers. Finally, you have the submit button control, and I insist in posting data from input forms, and that's why the data method must be always set to post. This is the view company view. Nothing very difficult there. The only thing that you should notice is the use of the detail view widget, through which you can display the fields of an object on screen in a nice tabular way. And I have to adjust the main menu so as to be able to call the actions of my controller. and notice how I can pass parameters in case this is necessary, and it's necessary for action message Z. And the rest of our controller, it's only action edit. See that action edit accepts a parameter. That's why in the behaviors function, I had to define that action edit accepts only posted data. Finally, the edit view, it's a copycat of the create view. Nothing there. The only thing worth mentioning is how variable state assumes the existing value of the company state. That's all. Our company X controller in action. Again, in our site RHC, admin, we enter there, and straight away we go to the company menu, new company. I type the tax ID, this should be 9 digits long, and I put 6 there, and you see it straight away, the rule function picked the error. So let's put that to inactive and become the 9, completed. Registration is that, type a name X, type an address, I use mix of capital and small letters, but they are all capitalized in input. Postal code 12345, telephone 1236790. That's okay. It saved the record, the new company. And here is the detailed view widget. We see the record presented in a nice tabular form. Let's edit that one and change the name to Roses. Again, save it. Now it has changed. So have a look at the address in the URL address in the address bar, and let's try to change the tax ID of the company through the address bar without going through our edit form. We change that to 8, and we press enter. Straight away you get an error message. It says that the method is not allowed. Why? Because the edit action accepts only post parameters. We come back to new, nothing else to see there, and we just log out. And a quick review of the lecture. We have seen that any web application may be thought as a small vocabulary of specialized words that allow the user to complete certain tasks on data that in most cases are stored in a database. And the MVC programming paradigm just provides a method that facilitates the developer to develop and structure this vocabulary. And we have written our first model, Company X, a corresponding Company X controller that allows simple input and editing and all necessary views. So thanks very much for watching. Please subscribe, please support.